In the small, forgotten town of Hollow Creek, there stood an ancient mansion, abandoned for decades. The townsfolk called it the Marlow House, a place shrouded in darkness and mystery. Whispers of eerie occurrences and ghostly sightings surrounded the old structure, but no one dared to venture near, especially after sunset. One evening, a young woman named Clara arrived in Hollow Creek. She was an antique collector, always on the lookout for rare and unique items. The tales of the Marlow House intrigued her, and she decided to explore it, hoping to find some hidden treasures. The townsfolk warned her against it, but Clara was determined. As she approached the mansion, the air grew colder, and the winds howled through the trees like a mournful wail. The house loomed before her, its once grand facade now decayed and overgrown with ivy. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit hallway lined with portraits of the long-dead Marlow family. Their eyes seemed to follow her as she stepped inside. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine, but she brushed it off as nerves. She wandered through the dusty rooms, her flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The house was filled with relics of the past, old furniture, cracked mirrors, and cobweb-covered chandeliers. But what caught her eye was a small, intricately designed dollhouse sitting on a table in what seemed to be a child's bedroom. The dollhouse was an exact replica of the Marlow house, down to the tiniest detail. Clara was mesmerized by its craftsmanship. She noticed that the rooms inside the dollhouse were fully furnished, and tiny porcelain dolls were placed throughout the rooms, frozen in various poses. The dolls were eerily lifelike, with expressions of fear and despair etched on their faces. As Clara reached out to touch the dollhouse, she heard a faint whispering, like a distant echo. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispering grew louder, and she could make out words. "Help us! Free us!" Clara yanked her hand back, but the whispering persisted, now accompanied by a soft, rhythmic tapping, as if something inside the dollhouse was trying to get out. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she carefully lifted the roof of the dollhouse to peer inside. To her horror, the tiny dolls began to move on their own. They turned their heads towards her, their eyes wide with terror. Suddenly, the room around her grew darker, and the temperature plummeted. Clara's breath came out in visible puffs, and the whispering turned into frantic cries for help. She tried to step back, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. The dolls in the dollhouse began to twist and contort, their porcelain faces cracking as they reached out towards her with tiny hands. Panic set in as Clara realized that the dollhouse was not just a toy, it was a prison. The souls of the Marlow family were trapped inside, cursed to relive their torment for eternity. She felt an icy hand on her shoulder and spun around, but there was no one there. The cries grew louder, more desperate, as if they were pleading with her to break the curse. In a frenzied state, Clara grabbed the dollhouse and hurled it to the ground. The tiny structure shattered into pieces, and the dolls inside crumbled to dust. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the house, shaking the very foundations of the mansion. Clara fled the room, her mind racing with fear. As she stumbled down the hallway, The portraits on the walls began to warp and twist, the faces of the Marlow family transforming into grotesque, demonic visages. The house seemed to come alive, the walls closing in on her as she ran. She reached the front door, but it slammed shut in her face. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "You freed us, but now you are ours." Clara's heart raced as she realized the true horror of the situation. By breaking the dollhouse, she had unleashed the vengeful spirits of the Marlow family. The curse had not been broken, it had been transferred to her. Desperate, Clara searched for another way out, but the house had become a labyrinth of endless corridors and staircases that led nowhere. The walls dripped with blood, and the floorboards groaned under the weight of unseen horrors. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision, always just out of reach. Finally, she found herself back in the child's bedroom, but it was no longer the dusty, abandoned room she had first entered. It was now a nightmarish version of itself, with the walls covered in dark stains and the furniture broken and decayed. The shattered pieces of the dollhouse had reassembled themselves, and the dolls were back in their places, their eyes fixed on Clara with a malevolent gaze. She backed away, but the door slammed shut behind her. The room filled with the sound of maniacal laughter, and the dolls began to move again, this time crawling towards her with jerky, unnatural movements. Clara screamed, but no sound came out. The room closed in around her, the dolls swarming over her like a tide of darkness. As they reached her, everything went black. When the townsfolk finally mustered the courage to check on Clara, they found the Marlow house as silent and foreboding as ever. There was no sign of Clara, only her abandoned car parked out front. The door to the mansion was wide open, as if inviting them in, but none dared to enter. They knew the stories, knew that the houses had claimed another victim. The dollhouse, once shattered, was now whole again, sitting in the child's bedroom, waiting for its next unwitting visitor. And if one were to look closely, they would see a new doll inside, a tiny porcelain figure with wide, terrified eyes that bore an uncanny resemblance to Clara. The Marlow houses stood as it always had, a silent sentinel of doom, its cursed dollhouse waiting to trap the souls of the curious and the foolish. The legend of Hollow Creek grew darker with each passing year, and the town continued to fade into obscurity, a place where no one ventured and no one returned. But if you listen closely on a quiet night, you might just hear the faint whispering of the trapped souls, begging for release, or perhaps warning you to stay away. For in the heart of Hollow Creek, the curse lives on, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to fall into its clutches.